another episode of Vegan Proteins Muscles by Brussels Radio. My name is Danny.
And I'm Giacomo.
And this is episode 174. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning into another episode. We have a kind of big one here today. I think it's one that people ask us about a lot, and it is going to be the menstrual cycle and how to sort of change your training, your diet, like what happens. That's what we're going to be talking about today. But before we get into that, like anything interesting going on right now?
Well, you see the shirt that I'm rocking? This is from 2015. You see this rhino over here? That was the... And you have a plant-based shirt on too? Which year is that? Does it say it? We're still writing years on it?
2017, I think.
There we go. So each year we design, we get a drawing going and we do something new for Plant Built. And David Clowers is designing this one this year. He did, what was that book that he did with the animals?
I don't remember what it was called, but it was basically, it was a comic style art book sort of that was like a bunch of vegan activists but drawn as like superheroes. It was really quite cool.
Yeah, and unlike previous years, you're going to be able to grab that limited edition print right away. We're going to put it right up on the Vegan Strong site, which, by the way, I think it's crazy. Even those of you who listen and watch us and everything don't even realize that we now have Vegan Strong merch on the site for purchase. So we've gotten that question so many times in the past. If you want a Vegan Strong shirt, go to the website.
Yeah, historically, we've only done fundraisers, so like Kickstarter style fundraisers, to help raise money for Plant Built because it's a very expensive event and it's a nonprofit event and people miss the fundraiser, but then they see the super cool merch go out and they're like, oh, I want to get one of those. And we're like, dude, you missed the fundraiser. Like we don't have them anymore. So we're trying something a little bit different this year. We're not going to do a formal fundraiser the way we have in the past, but we have put all of the clothing that Vegan Strong makes up on veganstrong.com, and it's still the same. It's still a fundraiser. All of the proceeds from it go to help support not just this event, but also other events where we go out and just do like education. So, because it's not cheap to get there. So it really helps us, and you get some really awesome vegan merch out of it. And I don't feel like there's a lot of great vegan fitness apparel out there. There used to be a ton and it was saturated. Now I feel like there's way less. So
I don't get it.
I don't know.
Where's all the cool vegan merch going?
Check it out. Well, I already said what we're talking about today. I feel like, is this like a weird one for you to talk about?
Why?
Because you've never had a period?
Obviously, I'm not going to have the same context here, and there's going to be some stuff that's going to be harder for me to speak on. I can't relate to others, of course, but no, I mean, I've been training female clients for like forever now. Most of our clients that come to us historically have been women. So this is not taboo for me to speak on. And it is something I'm somewhat familiar with.
Yeah, I don't think it's taboo. I think you're mature enough that it would not be a taboo topic. But I mean, I imagine it's just like, I don't know. I guess I can only imagine it would be sort of a difficult thing to speak about as somebody that's never actually personally experienced it. I don't know. So I was just thinking about that yesterday while I was like putting down my notes and things that I wanted to talk about. Like, how's Giacomo going to talk about this sort of thing? Because, and I think this is a really good segue, I guess, and this will not be surprising to almost any women watching this, but there's not a ton of research on this. Shocking, I know. And the menstrual cycle is actually one of the reasons why there's not a lot of research on female athletes. Like a lot of the research that we look at about like strength training and even dieting, performance, weightlifting, like most of that data, and this is also true for all sorts of things that have nothing to do with strength training, just data, just studies in general, are most of the time done on men only, because to
control it better as opposed to worrying about the variability of a menstrual cycle and thinking that's going to affect the scientific method, perhaps?
Yeah, instead of taking maybe that extra step to control for menstrual cycles, they just skip it altogether and cut women out of the picture.
Which is really weird when you think about it, because that should have you can still use the scientific method for variability.
See, the fact that you think it's weird just tells me that you're a guy. Because, I don't know, as a woman, I'm just so used to all of the research about everything, not ever including women at all. So
no, I'm frustrated, just like you. I think it's ridiculous.
No, I know you're frustrated.
Yeah,
I get it.
It's just stupid. It's crazy. Like that the fact that that is even a fact is just frustrating. That's all.
So in looking for research about this, there is some. I don't think it's great research. Like, a lot of the sample sizes were small, and like you said, it's not an easy thing to control for, but there's some insight in the research. But first I want to hear like your experience of training women with menstrual cycles. Like, what have you noticed?
As a dude, what I have noticed is that during that period of time, cravings definitely go up, and it can be harder to stick to a plan, a program, a goal during that period of time for some, not for all, who do in fact have their period. They're not on contraceptives. I also have noticed that there can sometimes be some fatigue or some pain that can keep women out of the gym or thinking that they should train. So it's like that question. It's like, put it this way. I've had clients who have wanted to experiment with training differently during their menstrual cycle, but for the most part, most of my female clients want to just try to keep pushing and push as much as they can, but also at some point they have to give in to the fact that like they're just too fatigued, or they got to skip a day, or they have to modify their workworkouts. But all in all, I have not encountered the majority of clients, because I remember you had a client or two that was like this as well back in the past. The majority of my clients, they don't look to like modify their training during their menstrual cycle, like intentionally.
Okay.
Well, what's your experience?
I mean, I could sum up this entire podcast and my experience in one sentence: that everybody is different, and very, very different. So, okay, let's talk about, first of all, a regular menstrual cycle. Let's talk about a regular menstrual cycle, because I think that's the best place to start. A regular menstrual cycle is somewhere in the vicinity of 28 days. Day 1 is the day that somebody starts to bleed. It's their actual period. And at that point, we're going to talk about the two major players in the hormones here: estrogen and progesterone. So those are the two main hormones here. On the day that somebody is to start bleeding, day 1, both of those hormones are very, very low. And then in the first half, the first 14 days of the menstrual cycle, it's called the follicular phase. And during this phase, estrogen goes up, and it peaks-ish at the top. And meanwhile, progesterone stays pretty low. Like, it starts to go up a little bit at the end, but it's still pretty low all the way through it. Then we go into the second half of the cycle. So follicular phase ends with ovulation. That's when the ovary actually like spits out an egg, right? As soon as you ovulate, estrogen starts to drop and progesterone starts to go up. And basically towards the end of, this is the luteal phase now we're in. At the end of the luteal phase, both of the hormones start to drop again, leading us back to day 1, low hormones of both, and you start bleeding. So that is the 28-day cycle, if it were on paper, scientifically. But I actually don't know the data on this, but I would say more than half of my female clients don't have a regular cycle. Like, about half of them could probably set their calendar sort of to it.
I've experienced that as well, honestly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of them can't, or it's not 28 days, it's like 5 weeks or 6 weeks, and then all of a sudden it'll be like 3 weeks for no reason. And so it makes it really hard to, one, predict what's going to happen. For a lot of women, like I said, some women can set their watch by it, and it's exactly what I just described. But for a lot of women, it's very, very different. And in both directions, and that's not even counting, which I was wondering, like, how much should we even get into this on this podcast? I actually feel like it should probably be its whole own podcast about birth control. What do you think?
I think so. Yeah, absolutely.
It's too much to talk about in this podcast.
Yeah.
But again, this doesn't even take into consideration women who are taking some sort of hormonal contraceptive, which also changes everything. So yeah, we'll put that in a box mostly for now. It might come up a little bit, but you guys want to hear a whole podcast on that? Because that's another question that we get a lot. Let us know. When they're doing a lot of these studies and they're picking the people that they're going to take for the studies, they're picking people who have regular, quote unquote, normal 28-ish day menstrual cycles, and also meet a lot of other criteria. But in my experience, that's only somewhere around half of women, I would say.
I would agree.
So like, how applicable is this data across a broad spectrum of women? And that's sort of the tough thing about it. Add in there?
No, I'm looking at all the studies that you want to reference here and talk about, and I'm definitely curious to start digging into them one at a time. And I agree with you. If you're going to sum up this entire podcast in one sentence, it is that everyone is like individuals. It's a case by case basis. Like everyone really is different, but that wouldn't make for a fun conversation. And there are some actual patterns here that do repeat themselves as far as like what you wind up doing with a client, what typical recommendations are.
Yeah, I guess I'm really curious to hear where you're going to go. It's taking all of my power to not kick my feet up on this table right now because we're on camera. Fun fact, I actually struggle to sit in a regular position without kicking my feet up. Drives everybody crazy, but I can't
struggle
help
to sit, period. I just run around in circles, so everyone's got their thing.
Okay, so the notes that we have here, that's why I have my laptop out, it's a lot of notes. We can go ahead and get into it. So first let's talk about some of the studies. There was a study where they checked women's performance on a treadmill. So how applicable is this to strength training? Not very, but let's just talk performance in general. So they had women, both the follicular, remember, towards the end of the follicular, estrogen is peaking. End of the follicular phase, they tested them on the treadmill. And then at the end of the luteal phase, or it was actually kind of the beginning of the luteal phase, which makes this study kind of murky. Anyway, during that half of the cycle, progesterone is higher, which I actually think we have to talk about that first. So we've talked about this on the menopause podcast about how estrogen gets this really bad rap, but actually estrogen is really protective and does a lot of good things, including makes women stronger, faster, build more muscle, etc. So one would predict by looking at that chart of the first half, estrogen being high, progesterone being low, and the second half, progesterone being lower and estrogen being lower and progesterone being higher, that women would perform better during the follicular phase when estrogen was higher. Because progesterone, while it's not bad, it does negate some of the good effects of estrogen in general on paper. So they put women on a treadmill and they just sped it up every minute that they were on it to see like how far they could push it. And what they found was there was almost no difference.
Right, that's what I'm seeing too.
Yeah, it was like a negligible difference, even though of course they predicted higher estrogen, better performance, right? Now, one of the limitations is, like I said, they did it towards the beginning of the follicular phase. And remember, estrogen is going up throughout. So estrogen might not have been that high. And then they did the, during the luteal phase, they did it kind of at the beginning. So estrogen could have been equal in both times of doing it. So that could be a limiting factor, but essentially they found no difference.
Right, and the thought is that there is some individual variability as well, though. They're outliers, essentially.
Well, again, that's how I would sum up this entire podcast, really.
Right.
They did another study similar, but with maximal strength, where they were checking the strength of the quadricep muscle. And they tested the women 3 times throughout the cycle. And this was really interesting because there actually was a difference. In the strength, there was a difference. The women were stronger and they did build more muscle during the tail end of the follicular phase when estrogen was highest, which sounds awesome, right? But again, the difference was not enough to be to like make significant changes. Like they couldn't say, oh, well, because of this, make these significant changes for every woman where they train harder during this week and less hard during this week, as a blanket statement for women across the board.
Okay, so what are you getting out of this so far other than inconclusive evidence that with these particular studies?
Exactly that. Inconclusive evidence.
Do you feel like having studies that were a little more controlled or with a wider body of participants or with the right kinds of variables, do you think that, it's hard to say, but do you hypothesize that we would get better insight?
So in the strength study, like when they looked at the average, which is what studies do, they look at the averages of the results, they graph them. The average was like negligible difference. Difference, yes, stronger in the follicular, more muscle in the follicular, but like such a small amount that they could chalk it up to error. But when they looked at individual differences, that's where they saw big changes. When they looked at like one woman, they might see a big jump during the follicular phase versus the luteal phase, whereas the next woman might have no difference whatsoever. Which again brings me back to like everyone is different, and I think that is incredibly key. So I'm going to get to what that means at some point during this, what I think that should translate to in like real world application.
Yeah.
But here is the most interesting study that I found. And I can't remember who it was. And I have so many notes here that I kind of can't remember which part of the notes this was in. But they did do a study where they studied women's performance, their strength performance, their training performance. And they had the women basically say whether or not they felt like their period was making them perform worse, like wherever they were in their cycle. Like, hey, how do you feel like your menstrual cycle affected you today? And the vast majority of the women said it made them perform worse. Like they performed worse. And when they actually looked at the data itself, they did not perform worse. They performed just as well.
So how they felt versus what they did were two different things. They felt like crap. They were still able to do the thing.
Precisely. So that is exactly what that particular study showed, which I found to be fascinating because this is a side note, kind of personal, but I don't have a menstrual cycle at all because I have a condition called endometriosis. It's hormonally treated. I no longer have a cycle, but I did for 15 plus years.
Remember.
Yeah, I bet you remember. And it was absolutely debilitating for me. But even when I could like cram enough ibuprofen to be able to walk around on those days, I still felt like shit while I was training. But I'm curious now, I wish I had it noted if I could go back and see, like, did my performance actually change or did I just feel like dirt while I was doing it?
Well, when you could actually get to the gym and you weren't writhing in pain because it was
Precisely.
pretty severe.
Yeah, but I don't think that's comparable to most people. I know there are some women out there dealing with the same thing. You have all my support. You ever want to talk about it, you shoot me a message. I'm happy to. But it's not common enough to make a podcast about. Or is it? Do you guys want to hear about it? But I think that, you know, so many of my clients report to me that they feel like trash during a certain point in their cycle, but that may not actually be affecting their training outcomes. Now that kind of sounds like gaslighting to me. Like, oh, I feel like shit, I can't train. Yes, you can, you're fine. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is I think it's just interesting to talk about and how that actually plays out. And does it matter? I think it does. But does it matter as much as maybe we think it does? Probably not.
Well, it matters in the sense of, one, how you treat yourself, and two, how the people who are working with you, your team, your coach, your squad, your friends, your family, loved ones, how they treat you. If you have the wrong kind of support, then I feel like that could actually shoot you in the foot. And if you beat yourself down, then you might wind up not training as much or not pushing as hard because you're worried or you're frustrated and thinking this is going to be something you can't do or shouldn't do, so you don't try as hard. So I think it can affect, I think those kinds of feelings are to be expected. However, they can impact your mindset and your approach if you let them. Put it that way. That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, I actually do agree with that. So how does this information, this data, and hopefully again there will be more data in the future. Like, we have to study this better. There has got to be a way to study this better. I'm not a scientist, but like I know they exist, and
If you're out there and you're a scientist and you're listening, please.
Yeah, it would just be nice to have better data on all of this stuff. But the way that this has been sort of warped into reality in the fitness influencer space, that's for shit sure, is this thing called cycle syncing, which, you know, based on the charts, again, of a perfect 28-day normal regular cycle, would, at least on paper, indicate that you're probably the strongest during the second week of your cycle and probably feeling the crappiest like the fourth week of your cycle. So the cycle syncing idea is that you would do these different kinds of exercise during each week of your cycle. And I should actually pull up a picture of what that looks like.
A lot.
Have you had any clients talk to you about this at all? Like this idea of cycle syncing?
Again, a small handful in the past, but no one pursued it. I did not pursue it.
So I just pulled up on Google like the first thing that came up for me. And it recommends that during menstruation, you do walking and yoga for that week. just walking and yoga. During week 2, when you're the strongest, you could be doing your swimming, your bike riding, your hiking, you know, we're ramping up. And then during ovulation, remember, this is when estrogen is the highest, progesterone's just starting to ramp up. This is when you do your hardest stuff, your high intensity interval training, your strength training, your circuit training. And then during your luteal phase, you do low impact exercises like Pilates and yoga.
So over the course of how many days is all that?
28.
Over the course of 28 days, you're going to have 1 solid week of strength training. Don't do that.
Yeah, exactly. Okay.
Don't do that.
So,
Please don't do that.
This is a terrible friggin' idea. I mean, if you ever want to, I mean, okay, I guess if you're just trying to like live your life and do healthy stuff in general, whatever, do this. I don't care. But if you're trying to change your body in some way, if you are trying to get stronger, leaner, fitter, any of those things, this, as it is written and as I have seen it pop up on Instagram and Pinterest and all of that stuff, is an awful idea. There is precisely 0 specificity in here, right? You're just all over the map. You're never going to get good at anything on here because you're only doing it 1 week out of every 4. I don't even know where to begin with what a terrible idea this is.
I want to know whose idea this was and why it became viral.
Everywhere. It's everywhere.
This is disappointing to say the least.
It's all over podcasts. It's all over YouTube. In my research for this, I came up against it again and again and again. And as a coach to mostly women for nearly 15 years, this is not a good idea at all.
Terrible.
But that doesn't mean that every principle in here is trash. And to me, that's where that individualization comes in. And this is what I do with my female bleeding clients if they need it. And that's key.
Yeah, and these are the same principles that we use for all kinds of reasons, though, not just for when someone is at a point in their menstrual cycle where they're unable to train at max capacity. We apply these principles for when someone's traveling, for when someone has to prioritize other things in their life, for when someone is overly fatigued, for when someone doesn't have the time, all kinds of reasons. But the principles are the same, right? You're not just going to take that week and be like, this is a wash week. That's ridiculous.
Right.
You take off, maybe it's like, okay, take off a set of every exercise as needed. Take it day by day. For example, don't just go like on a straight on deload, for example.
Right. Well,
it's a possibility, but not.
I have so this is important. Like, a good chunk of my women, their period affects them 0. They don't even tell me about it sometimes because it doesn't even blip on their radar that it matters. It doesn't affect their training, doesn't affect their sleep, doesn't affect their cravings, doesn't affect anything. So why would we change something just because they're in a certain phase? It doesn't make sense, right? And then there are other women who they are trash for like 2 days out of the month or 2 days every 5 weeks. They're just worthless in the gym. Am I going to make them go train on those days? No. But
Other
I mean,
thing, yeah,
but it's like 2 days.
Exactly.
You know? It's like 2 days. What's the big deal? Yeah. And then there are other women still that a particular week or more than a couple of days, they just know they feel kind of like, bleh, like every month. They just kind of, they can feel it coming, you know? So for those women, if they're regular enough, I will put their deloads during that week. If we can kind of get ahead of it and know, like, okay, you're pretty regular, so likely on this week, you're not going to feel very good. But I'm gonna give you a deload in the next 5 weeks anyway. Let's put it there. That just makes the most sense.
And it depends on every single person, right? Because if it's the kind of person who's training consistently and their cycle is consistent, then yes. But if it's the kind of person who has to wind up juggling or prioritizing their schedule, and you program in a deload, and all of a sudden, like, there's another week where they're just not training as hard and not able to, that's a bad idea. So again, it depends on the individual and what they have going on in their life with their routine and whatnot.
Right. But even the women who don't feel super good, like, don't forget that study. Most of the women thought that their menstrual syndrome symptoms were affecting their performance, and it actually wasn't. It just felt like it because, like, yeah, maybe they had some, like, low back fatigue, so their squats felt shittier, but they actually got the same weight, the same reps as they did the week before. I mean, should we be forcing ourselves to feel shittier just so that we can perform the same? That's entirely up to the individual. For some people's goals, it doesn't make sense to, like, go out of your way to make yourself feel worse just so you can check a box and be like, I got it. But for some women who have very specific goals on very specific days, or they're like, you know, elite athletes, like, yeah, sometimes we got to push through some of that, because I'm not saying it's not real, because it is real. I'm saying it might not be affecting your training the way you think it is.
Yes. Yes, exactly. And there are all kinds of feelings that can mess with what you think you're actually doing, what your output is in the gym. Stress, for example. You're not a 20-year-old with no responsibilities, hypothetically speaking, and you're a 35-year-old with a ton of responsibilities. And so many days in the gym might just feel like you're spinning your wheels. But when you start to actually look at things and reward yourself and be like, what am I doing? How am I doing it? Am I doing well? You probably are doing maybe not quite as well as that 20-year-old for a variety of reasons, but you're doing better than you think. So, and I feel like with your menstrual cycle, it's similar, where your feelings are going to put you in a position where your mind is going to mess with you, thinking that you're not actually pushing as hard as you actually are. Spoiler alert, you probably are.
Yeah. It's just, you know, I think if you do struggle with symptoms of, like, you know, PMS or PMDD or just anything in that spectrum, it's always a good idea to look at your lifestyle. And please do not take this as me like, you just need to eat less salt and drink more water and you won't have period problems. Because listen, I got that shit for almost 20 goddamn years before they were like, oh, you're actually very, very ill. But obviously it stands to reason, like, look at your regular lifestyle habits, see if there's anywhere where you could probably make it a little bit easier for yourself. Like, you know, don't eat a crap load of sodium if you know you're already going into a time of the month where you feel bloated and uncomfortable. That just seems like it makes sense. Try to get good sleep. Try to, you know, keep your stress low. Eat well, eat lots of nutrient-dense foods. Like, all of that stuff can only help, but, you know, for a good chunk of women, it's not going to like fix the problem. And any asshole out there that tries to tell you that going on a particular fast or cleanse or whatever is going to fix your very serious period problems, I would like to meet them in a back alley somewhere.
She would.
I would. It's one of my biggest, like, gripes in general, is just how women are treated in the medical field. But I'll stop right there. So you really have to, you know, look at the data, learn the data. It's interesting to see what this stuff looks like, but then remember, you are not the data. You are you, and your personal situation may look so different than that data, and it's okay. There may very well be, like, nothing wrong with you. It's just that's the way your cycle runs. Pay attention to how you feel throughout that cycle so that you can make appropriate adjustments. Likewise, on the flip side of that deload, if you know there's a week every cycle that you feel like a goddamn beast and you're, let's say, training for maximal strength, like, let's put those AMRAP tests during that week.
Or go closer to failure than you normally would, for example. Juice up a couple extra reps. Go for it.
Sometimes this stuff is not possible, you know? Like, I have female clients that are training for powerlifting meets. If they're during their weakest week of their menstrual cycle and that's the week of the powerlifting meet, too damn bad. That's when you're gonna do the meet. How many of our clients get their period right before their bodybuilding competition?
Surprisingly high percentage.
It makes sense when you think about it,
Exactly.
actually. Because, like, they probably haven't had their period for a long time, and then you start carbing them up for the show, and their body's like, yay, food, we can house a baby again. And then you just start bleeding right before the show. So unfair. But, like, what are you going to do about that? There are some things you could do about that, but not putting that on a podcast.
Right.
So, you know, it's gonna come at the most inopportune times sometimes, and finding a way to sort of know your strengths, your weaknesses within that calendar, whatever that calendar is for you, is going to be helpful, and communicate it to your coach.
Right.
You know, Giacomo's a great example. Like, I have never met a male coach that was weird about this stuff. Maybe like back in like the 90s or something. But I feel like maybe I just run in great circles, and that's probably true.
Right.
The coaches that I am friends with, the coaches that I look up to, the researchers in this field that I look up to, like, they don't even blink talking about this stuff. So I know a lot of women are really uncomfortable to talk to a guy about their period, but if your coach is worth their salt at all, they should be like sympathetic. I was going to say empathetic, but you can't really be empathetic to this. Sympathetic to this and willing to listen and not tell you, you are a data point. This is how we treat periods. And you just fall right into that box.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anything you want to say about food? Because that's a big one. Like women, because progesterone, when it increases, that's trying to get your body ready to house a baby, right? So your body starts like being like, let's eat more food because you're about to have a baby and we need to make sure you have plenty of nutrients for that. So a lot of those cravings women feel during a particular time in their cycle, that's not psychosomatic, that's real.
Yeah.
You know? So, but sometimes that is counter to what the goal is that they're trying to meet.
Yeah.
How do you handle that?
It's a very good question. I suppose you can move days around so that you can eat a little more on the days that are extremely difficult if you're going to do calorie cycling anyway.
Like if you're doing refeed days, move the refeed days.
The kind of programming that will allow for that. Sometimes you don't, though, and you really do have to suck it up, Buttercup, unfortunately.
Yes, like bodybuilding prep is a good example. Like, no, we can't give you extra high days when you're 28 days out from your first show. I would love to. I want to. Believe me, I want to make this as easy for you as possible, but certain goals will not allow it. But most people's goals will. You know, will it slow down your fat loss? Probably. Like, probably a little bit. But, I mean, it's up to you. Is that worth the trade-off?
Right. And it might not be worth it for you if you're feeling really hungry and craving whatever on a Tuesday, if it means you can't have more food on a Saturday. That might not be worth it to you. So you have to decide, basically.
Or, you know, to recognize like, oh, maybe coach me, I'll give you a diet break for the next 5 days or something. That's, in the long run, that's not going to hurt anybody. But it might take your day of especially if you're doing this every month, right? I mean, that will add 25% of time between you and the goal.
It will slow things down. Again, a choice.
A choice, right? And it's all comes down to choices.
Yes.
So, and again, a lot of women don't experience this. They don't experience any noticeable effects whatsoever.
Right.
Have always been like in awe of those women because that was not even one time my experience. Fun fact, this is kind of a funny story. I've told you this before.
I love stories. Shoot.
I remember the very first time I got my period, I was 12.
Okay.
And I vividly, I had bad cramps before it even happened. I didn't know what was going on. But I remember when it did happen, I was like sitting at the end of my hallway next to the bathroom, like against the wall, rocking myself back and forth, like screaming and crying. And my mom being like, it's a beautiful thing, honey. It means that, you know, someday you're going to be able to have a baby because of this. And I remember saying like, I don't even want a freaking baby. Just take it out. I never want to deal with this again. And she was all, ha 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 ha, that's so cute of you. You'll change your mind someday. And I like to remind her of that frequently because I did not change my mind. I would have been totally fine if they had scooped some of that apparatus out at 12 years old. I mean, I guess I understand why the medical community doesn't do that, but just putting it out there. And just one more thing I want to say about this.
Go for it.
I'm sorry. I'm talking so much during this podcast.
Yes. Duh.
Ibuprofen, Tylenol, painkillers, when you have those really debilitating cramps, like sometimes you have to take those things, those NSAIDs. I took way too many for way too long. It was a big problem. But even if you don't do that, you know, a lot of times people have to take like Advil to get through their day. I get it. Be very careful taking Advil, Tylenol, Aleve, NSAID, anything like that, and then going to the gym because it's a painkiller. So if you, let's say, yes, it will knock out your cramps so you can go do whatever it is you got to do at the gym. But if you drop into a squat too quickly and like pull your quad a little bit or something, you might not feel it. So you might go back and do another set and another set and another set. And then when the Advil wears off, you're like, my leg is destroyed. What happened? You know, that painkiller can mask pain that is very important pain for you to feel while you're training. So anytime you have any kind of painkiller in your system before you go train, Like, you have to be super, super careful
of how hard you're pushing
your form.
And there is that idea that you're going to dampen the inflammatory response after training, which would affect your ability to recover and build muscle.
Yes. So to explain that, we always talk about inflammation like it's a bad thing, because chronic inflammation is a bad thing, but acute inflammation after you train, that is necessary.
So your body's response to that is to repair muscle tissue and grow it. So if you remove that response,
it's going to be less effective.
Correct.
You know, and Advil, all these things, yes, they're painkillers, they're also anti-inflammatories. So it's why chronic use, I mean, it's one of the many reasons chronic use of these things is not good. So my final thing I will say, if you are a woman whose period is debilitating for you, if you cannot function for a full week out of the month or 5 days out of the month without fistfuls of ibuprofen just to survive, I will say it because your doctor very well may not. That is not normal. You should not have to live like that. There are ways to help that, fix that, improve that, make your life more livable if you are in that situation. And I will die on that hill. And I have helped so many of my clients get out of that situation, not because I'm some hormone expert or anything, but because I've been through it and I know the treatments that help that sort of thing for a lot of women. So don't let a doctor tell you that's normal. That's just the pains of being a woman. And sometimes it's the women doctors who are the worst about this thing. So if one doctor pushes you away, go to another doctor, because nobody should be living like that. I missed an entire year of high school when you added up all of my absences, which, shocking, is 25% of the time, which is 1 week out of the month for all of high school. Don't live like that.
Yeah.
That's it. Wrap us up.
All right. Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of Vegan Proteins Muscles by Brussels Radio. Stay in touch with us at Vegan Proteins, at Muscles by Brussels. Shoot us a contact. Hit the contact button on veganproteins.com. We'll answer you right away. Right away. Once again, my name is 𝐮𝐬𝐫𝐽.
And I'm Danny.
I'll talk to you soon.
Bye.